Good evening. So, we'll now take up Unit 1 in Part B, that is, idea of Indian village and village studies. Lady, you have come for the first time? Okay. You joined the course? Demo club. All right. So, you come to judge me. Okay. Idea of Indian village and village study. Now, what does it mean? What it means is that how did the idea of village develop in India? Now, village was already there. How did scholars, sociologists, how did they conceive of the village? And why did they conceive of the village in this manner? It is their conception. That means उन्होंने village को कैसे define किया? What was its importance in understanding Indian society? To understand Indian society, why was knowing the village important? Clear? Now, in, you can say, scholarly writings, I will not say sociological, because initially the idea of Indian village was not conceived by sociologists. Sociology was not there at that time in India. Sociologists took over later. So it was during the colonial period that the idea of Indian village developed. That it was seen as an ideological category through which India was to be understood and imaged. इंडिया की पिक्चर जो है वो कैसे प्रेजेंट करनी है इन टर्म्स ऑफ विलेज. सो इट वाज इन टर्म्स ऑफ द विलेज दैट इंडिया वाज टू बी इमेज्ड. व्हाई was it so? Because these scholars believed that village was the signifier of authentic, traditional, native life. What does it mean? Authentic means the true picture of something. So, authentic, traditional, native life. Native का मतलब Indians की, of Indians. Why did they use the word native? Because they were all Britishers. In the beginning, those who tried to understand village, they happen to be British scholars. So by native they meant of India. A traditional India ko if you have to understand, look at the village. Alright. So village was seen as not merely a place where people lived, not merely a place where people lived, but a place where we can find the basic values of Indian civilization. अगर इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन को अंडरस्टैंड करना है तो लुक एट द विलेज. क्लियर? एंड therefore the British scholars they came to define the village. Most important name among the British scholars was Charles Metcalfe. Charles Metcalfe. I'll read out a small paragraph from the writing of Charles Metcalfe and then I'll explain it. He says, Indian villages are little republics having nearly everything they wanted within themselves and almost independent of external relations. They seem to last where nothing else lasted. Dynasty after dynasty tumbled down. Revolution succeeded revolution, but village community remained the same. All right. So from this paragraph, you can see what kind of image you get of Indian village. The image that crystallized in the writings of British scholars. That village is little republic. That means self-governing, where the rulers of the village are elected by people. Then village is self-sufficient, that they had almost everything they wanted within themselves and therefore almost independent of external relations. That means isolated, self-sufficient, and there was change in society. He says, no, dynasty followed dynasty, revolution succeeded revolution, but village remained the same. That means unchanging, static. That was the idea they formed about Indian village. Have you understood this? Now, later on, these ideas also influenced the nationalist discourse. Nationalist discourse का क्या मतलब? Discourse means writings, ideas of nationalist leaders, freedom movement leaders. their thinking was also shaped by the writings of the British scholars. Gandhi comes out as the most prominent among them. Now, Gandhi celebrated the simplicity and authenticity of village life. Although he was aware that there is a lot of decadence in the village, but that decay of the village was attributed to British rule. It is because of the British rule that village exists in a decadent form. Decadent कैसे था? Poverty, untouchability, oppression of women, and so on. Superstitions. These are aspects of decadence in the village life. But they said this decadence is because of the British. But otherwise, village life is an example of simplicity and authenticity. Now, for this, I have told you the gist. I'll read out a paragraph which you have to only listen but not write. It's a debate between Gandhi and Nehru. It was in 1945. Gandhi said, I am convinced that if India is to attain true freedom, then sooner or later the fact must be recognized that people have to live in villages, not in towns. They have to live in huts, not in palaces. Crores of people will never be able to live in peace with each other in towns and palaces. They will then have no recourse but to resort to violence and untruth. I hold that without truth and non-violence, there can be nothing but destruction of humanity. It's a part of Gandhi's thinking where Gandhi thought that industrial civilization is a satanic civilization. And he wanted that people should lead a simple life. Gandhi's idea that people should voluntarily control their desires. They should not lead a life of unlimited desires as we are living today. If we lead a life of unlimited desires, there will be violence, there will be untruth, and that will lead to destruction of humanity. So therefore, village should be the center of social organization in India. Self-sufficient, independent villages. That's what Gandhi said. Nehru was opposed to this. Nehru has been called the modernizer, who emphasized on industry. So, Nehru answered back, the whole question is how to achieve such a society of non-violence and truth. I don't understand why a village should embody truth and non-violence. A village is a backward community, both intellectually and culturally, and no progress can be made from a backward environment. Narrow-minded people are much more likely to be untruthful and violent. So Nehru was critical of the village life, that there is so much of untruth and violence in village community. And if they are backward, uneducated, culturally and intellectually backward, then they are going to be narrow-minded and violent. So this is how there was a debate in the pre-independence period among the nationalists. Now, but idea of village, the result of this was that idea of village became an important issue, an important idea. And after independence, a lot of focus was placed on the study of village life. So I have told you how the idea of village crystallized. Now, why should you study village? That they said village is a microcosm that represents the macrocosm, which is India. Microcosm का मतलब समझते हैं? छोटा sample. So, in village, you find the essence of entire Indian civilization. So, if you have to know India, know the village first. Then, in independent India, we embarked on what is called nation building, modernization, to create India as a developed modern nation. That was the Nehru's vision. And therefore, they said we need to transform the village as well. We have to develop the village. Now, this stagnant village has to be converted into a progressive, developing community. So, what are the problems of development? How to do that? We can only know this if we first know what is the nature of the village in the first place. All right? That in order to transform village, the first requirement is to know its nature, what it is. Then, village society after independence was being studied by different type of social scientists, particularly economists, because planning was the area which was dominated by economists. Now, economists studied village in terms of quantitative parameters. Quantitative, you understand? The other day we discussed quantitative and qualitative methods. That economists would look at the population of the village, they will look at the total land holding, they will look at the food output, they will look at the incidence of poverty in terms of numerical figures. All this is quantitative. Sociologists pointed out that our approach to study and understand village is superior, because they said our approach is holistic and qualitative. Holistic का मतलब आप समझते हैं? We look at village as a single whole, united whole, and we study the village in its totality. We understand the nature of intercaste interaction. We look into the practices like untouchability. We look at the religious ideas of the people. We look at the gender relations in the village. So like this, we try to study everything about the village. So they said, our view of village is superior to what the economists do, who look at things in a fragmented manner. All right. So that was another reason why village should be studied. Thirdly, they said that since we are now changing the village society, so it is important that we document the nature of traditional village before it is transformed beyond recognition. बदलने के बाद तो ये पहचान में भी नहीं आएगा कि ट्रेडिशनल इंडिया कैसा था. So only by studying the village we will know what was traditional Indian society. Is that clear? Then one more factor. At this time, that means after independence, that means in 1950s. Now, we talked about tribal society, all right? And tribal society means societies which were very, very simple, where even agriculture has not developed. So, social anthropologists were traditionally concerned with the study of tribal societies. That was their subject matter. But as you know, that after World War II, so many countries gained independence and they all tried to modernize and industrialize. So social anthropology was left with no subject matter. क्या study करें हम? Tribes तो vanish हो रही हैं, they are disappearing. African, Asian countries were all, changing towards industrial societies. So therefore, sociologists and social anthropologists said, let us study agricultural society, peasantry. So village society in India was the society of peasantry. So that's how they developed an interest in the study of villages. All right. So I have tried to answer the question, why village studies? Firstly, I told you how the idea of village crystallized. Second thing I have told you is, why was there an interest to study village? So during 50s, 60s and 70s, hundreds of village studies were carried out, both by Indian sociologists and also by foreign scholars, European and American scholars. As I told you yesterday, that we had launched community development program to transform villages. And I also mentioned that this was the largest rural development program anywhere in the world. So this also aroused a lot of curiosity that how a traditional village is now changing. So these sociologists carried out case studies. Case study समझते हो? To study one item in detail. All right. So hundreds of case studies were carried out. So now, what am I talking about? I am answering the third question. How was the village studied? Firstly, I said, what was the idea of the village? Then I said, why to study village? Now I am saying, how to study village. So, intensive field work was carried out. Do you understand the meaning of field work? That you go and directly observe the society or the people whom you want to study. And they adopted participant observation method. I had referred to this while talking about sociological research methods. I gave you the example of Norton Street Gang studied by William White. He also adopted participant observation. So participant observation क्या होता है? What is participant observation? The observer goes and lives in the group that he wants to study, the community that he wants to study. And while living there, he observes the actual behavior between individuals and groups in that community, which is recorded. And based on this evidence, he arrives at his opinion about the community. So these scholars, they spent 1 or 2 years living in a village, observing all aspects of village life. And that is how it was a holistic and qualitative approach. Is that clear? They collected first-hand information. While living in the village. All right. So this is about how did they study village, how village studies were carried out, particularly in the first phase. As I mentioned just now, I am talking about village studies during the decades of 50s, 60s and 70s. Incidentally, I'll make a comment which is not directly related. I recommended that you should read Society in India by David Mandelbaum. That entire book is based on the findings of these case studies. The whole book, Society in India, written by Mandelbaum, who himself also conducted a study, is based on the findings of all these studies carried out during these 3 decades. Then comes the fourth question. What all did they try to study? What were their focal areas in the village? One, they describe the demographic structure of the village. Then, next, they looked at family and kinship ties in the village. And also, though to a limited extent, try to look at gender relations within the family. Why did I say to a limited extent? Because gender relations का मतलब relation between husband wife, between men and women. Now these are little personal and sensitive matters. So these outsiders, all sociologists were outsiders. They tried to avoid such inquiries, asking people about their family relations. So description of gender relations was relatively limited, but that was also described. Then the hierarchy of caste. As I told you when I was discussing caste system, that M.N. Srinivas, who studied Rampura, so he, on the basis of that, identified that there are two parallel hierarchies, ritual hierarchy and secular hierarchy. And then he also explored what are the bases of these two hierarchies of caste. And that is how, unlike the book view, which talked about caste only as four varnas, unlike that, a more realistic field view of caste based on Jati model, we have discussed the Jati model, that emerged through these village studies. Then they also try to understand interdependence among castes. You remember, I told you about Jajmani relations, where different castes contribute their occupational services in return for food within the village. You may remember I quoted a paragraph from M.N. Srinivas about marriage in a peasant family. So how each caste member made their contribution for the marriage. This is how there was interdependence between castes. Every caste needed the other caste. Then they also studied intra-caste relations. Intra-caste, you understand? Inter is between castes. Intra is within caste. Relations within the jati. And they also tried to explain how it created a sense of unity. You remember I called it horizontal solidarity. Inter-caste relations contributed to vertical solidarity, while intra-caste studies explain the basis of horizontal solidarity. Horizontal means within the same caste. Vertical would mean between a higher and a lower caste. And it is because of this vertical solidarity that people identify so strongly with their village traditionally. Like these studies which are quoted in Mandelbaum shows that suppose there is a wrestling match in the village and people from number of neighboring villages were participating. Now the people who watched the wrestling match, they supported the wrestler of their own village, even if he was, in a wrestling bout with the wrestler of the neighboring village which belonged to their caste. For example, Marathas. So if in Maharashtra wrestling is a very popular sport, so a man of the village would support the wrestler from their own village, who may be from a different caste, not a Maratha, and the wrestler from the other village is a Maratha. He will not support that Maratha, he will support the man of their own village. That's how there was a sense of unity in the village. People identified with their village. Then they also looked at class structure. All right. Class structure means inequality in terms of wealth. And in village, the main source of wealth is land. So by looking at distribution of land holdings, they tried to identify the class divisions. You remember when I was discussing Andre Bete's study of Shiripuram village, so he identified three main classes: the landlords, the tenants, and agricultural laborers. So like this, they tried to identify the class structure. Then they also studied various religious ceremonies and celebrations in the village. Now, it so happened that majority of these sociologists and social anthropologists, you understand the difference between sociology and social anthropology? No. Social anthropology is generally that kind of sociological inquiry which was traditionally concerned with tribes, very, very simple societies. And sociology is the term used for those studies which are concerned with industrial societies. But in case of countries like India, we cannot make a clear demarcation. Because to study India, you have villages also and you have cities also. If you are studying a city life, you are a sociologist. The same man, when he studies village, he becomes a social anthropologist. So they mean more or less the same thing in India. So most of these sociologists and social anthropologists, they try to focus on unity, cohesion, and the factors that led to continuity of the village life. But some sociologists, for example, the names may include F.G. Bailey, 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 F.G. Bailey, and Oscar Lewis, O-S-C-A-R, Oscar, L-E-W-I-S, Oscar Lewis. They did look at the cleavages. You understand cleavage? When two things split apart, that's called cleavage. So the cleavage, that means disunity. Cleavage leads to conflict. So the conflict in village society, the inequality in village society. And you may add one more name, Joan Mencher. I mentioned her name also when I was talking about perspectives on untouchability. Joan, Joan, Joan Mencher, Mencher. She looked at the power structure in the village. How some groups controlled and dominated over other groups. So these are the areas of investigation. Then, what were the achievements of these village studies? These village studies led to the rejection of the colonial view. Did you understand colonial view? Colonial view means view of the British scholars during the period of British rule in India, like Charles Metcalfe. That is the most famous view about village among the British scholars. They said village is neither a republic and nor self-sufficient. People of the village always had relations with numerous villages in the neighborhood. For example, they found that no village had all the jatis whose services they needed. You may remember I mentioned two examples to you while talking about caste system and Jajmani relations. Goldsmith, those who make ornament. Now, you need a goldsmith only at the time of ceremonial occasions, birth or marriage. These things happen infrequently. So, goldsmith will not get enough work if he restricted himself to one village. So, a goldsmith may serve 8 or 10 villages around. One goldsmith family would supply the needs of many villages. Like that, barbers also. So, there was a general practice in northern India of itinerant barbers. They'll keep moving from one village to another. And as a result of that, they did what Shadi.com does, providing data on marriageable brides and grooms, because they went to different villages, interacted with people, so they collected information that for this jati, there is a girl in that village and there is a boy in this village. He will link the two. Yes, exactly. So, villages were not self-sufficient, independent of external relations. So, like that, it was a corrective to the colonial view. Then, it also emphasized a great deal on how peace and harmony is maintained in the village. And in the process, they discovered many concepts related to village community. They developed many concepts. You may remember I had mentioned about dominant caste All right, the concept of dominant caste given by M. N. Srinivas while he is talking about the secular hierarchy of the village. Then I also talked to you about Sanskritization. Then I also talked to you about harmonic and disharmonic societies. That how village which was earlier harmonic is now heading towards disharmonic. So like this, various important concepts emerge which enrich sociology. Now, at the same time, there were number of limitations also. See, as I told you that all the sociologists, whether Indian or foreign, none of them belong to the village they studied. They were all outsiders. An outsider has a problem of acceptance. Will the people accept him or her? And will they, reveal their social relations to an outsider? Will you mention them accurately and correctly? Isn't it? You don't want to talk about various things, real things to a stranger. When you talk with a stranger, you present a very ideal picture. All right. For example, you say, in our society, women are, worshipped as goddesses, Devi. In reality, you burn them alive if they don't get enough dowry. That's a reality. You won't reveal that. So they had a problem of acceptance. And therefore, that's why I said they did not interfere and ask questions about very personal and intimate matters. And secondly, they presented a conservative view. How? See, when they would go to a village and decide to live in the village, so they will approach whom? The village mukhya, pradhan or sarpanch. And that person would invariably be from an upper caste. He would be given quarters in that part of the village only. And you know that different castes are segregated in the village. Each caste has its separate quarters, and the area where Dalits live, upper caste people don't go there. I mentioned that example of Tiripuram village, that it was divided into three parts. Agraharam, where Brahmins lived, Ur, where middle caste lived, and Cheri, where Adi Dravidas or Dalits lived. So when Andre Bete went to study that village, he was given a quarter in the Agraharam. Brahman made it very clear, either be here or go to Cheri. We will not allow you to come back if you visit the Cheri. That means quarters of untouchable caste. Same was the problem with M. N. Srinivas. He admitted that most of the time the data or the information that he collected was by talking to people from the dominant caste. And he was not allowed to go where untouchable caste and Muslims lived. So he did not collect information from Muslims and untouchables. These are the practical problems of research. This is what is called field limitation. But as a result, they ended up with the upper caste view of village life. only Joan Mencher, he spent a lot of time living among Harijans or Dalits. Otherwise, overwhelming majority, they lived in the upper caste areas. And therefore, they ended up presenting a rosy picture of the village. Issues like exploitation, injustice, conflict, oppression, like sexual exploitation of lower caste women by upper caste men. All these issues are absent. Only Oscar Lewis and F.G. Bailey mentioned these. Then their findings focus more on the structure. Structure, you understand? Structure means pattern of interrelationship between parts. So if you want to describe the structure, firstly, you identify the parts. What are the parts? Then you talk about the relation among those parts. So in the case of village structure, you will talk about relationship between jatis, within jatis, etc. And then this structure was connected with peace and harmony. That how these parts, by satisfying the needs of the village, are contributing to peace and harmony. They didn't talk much about conflict and change. So this is the first phase of village studies. Now, you have heard of Green Revolution. We adopted high yielding varieties in agriculture to increase food output. So the Green Revolution was introduced in late 60s. So by late 70s, the impact of Green Revolution was very evident. So in late 70s and 80s, the focus shifted towards change. Because Green Revolution itself was an important economic change. So how changes are happening in the village? Like policy of land reform, followed by policy of Green Revolution. So during this period, they tried to look at the consequences of these changes. So they acknowledged, now this is the second phase, they acknowledge that in Green Revolution areas, there is capitalistic transformation of village economy. What do you understand by this? Capitalistic transformation. You know, capitalism is a system in which economic activity is carried out to generate profit. Basic motive for production is to sell the produce and earn profit. Prior to this, Indian village was based on subsistence economy. What is subsistence economy? Where production is carried out to satisfy local needs. I'll give you an example. That in subsistence economy, suppose there is a shoemaker in the village. He will make just enough shoes that everybody in the village has a pair of shoes to wear. And then he'll stop. But look at what Nike is doing. They make shoes for their country, for other countries, for the entire world. And if they find that on Mars there are creatures with feet, they will export shoes to Mars also. So, the more you sell, the more the profit. That's capitalism. Capitalism is a system of unlimited desires. So, Indian villages also change from subsistence economy to capitalistic market economy. Then Green Revolution also impacted Jajmani system that I have already discussed with you. Jajmani system is the caste, economic dimension of caste. So Jajmani system broke down. Wage labor relationship developed. There was de-peasantization. De-peasantization. What is de-peasantization? That earlier people who were landowners, but small and marginal landowners, they were now forced to sell off their land and become wage laborers. They ceased to be peasants. I mentioned this point in the case of tribes also. You remember that the census data between 2001 to 2011 showed that 10% of cultivators with land now became landless workers. Same thing happened in Green Revolution areas also. And as a result of this, inequality increased. Rich became richer and poor became poorer. And the poor people, when they raised demands for higher wages, there was conflict. So there was a lot of inter-caste conflict in Indian villages throughout 80s and 90s because of this capitalistic transformation. You might have read about it in the newspapers in Bihar. There are private armies, like Bhumihars have Ranbir Sena, and they attacked the workers in Jehanabad. There was murder of 52 agricultural laborers by Ranbir Sena. And there are hundreds of examples of attack on lower caste by higher caste. That's how we say that village community has changed from harmonic to disharmonic. Conflict has increased. And new kind of power struggle developed. How? This was first studied by Rajni Kothari, but acknowledged by many sociologists afterwards. What happened? That middle castes, after land reforms, they became landowners. And with Green Revolution, their incomes also increased. So they started challenging the upper caste in their struggle for power. Rajni Kothari has used two terms, entrenched caste and ascendant caste. Entrenched means those who are already at the top, and ascendant means those who are rising above, challenging those who are at the top. See, that is how Jat, Yadav, Kurmis, they have become powerful now, displacing Rajputs, Thakurs and other upper castes. Entrenched means those who are already at the top, well established at the top. Ascendant means who are rising. So these rising classes, castes, challenge the entrenched caste. The Yadavs are so powerful in Bihar and UP. So they are an example of ascendant caste. Jats in Rajasthan are challenging the domination of Rajputs. So this is how power struggle developed. This was also another area of study in 80s. Then by 90s, other problems also surfaced. That green revolution had negative consequences for ecology. For example, in green revolution areas, the need for water for irrigating the crop is very high. So it leads to salination of the soil. Too much of use of chemical fertilizers, they also lead to desertification. So like this, there are various ecological consequences. These aspects were also studied by village studies in 1980s and 90s. Clear? Any question, anything you have not understood? Then, so this we call the second phase of village studies. Then we move on to the third phase. Third phase is from late 90s till now. Hmm? See what happens. Green revolution is a very capital intensive method. What does it mean? That you have to invest a lot in the land first to generate a higher output. All right. And then there are problems like lack of warehousing. So what happens? The small and marginal farmers, they have to buy one fertilizers. They have to dig a well and install a pump set, or there must be a canal for irrigation. So they have, mostly canals are very few. So most of them have to invest in digging a bore well and installing a pump set. Then they need pesticides. They need high yield variety seeds. All this involves a lot of investment. But you make the investment and succeed. But what happens is, you produce a lot of food grain. There is no warehousing. You can't store it. So what do? You rush to the market. There is a glut. And therefore, prices crash. You know, basic economics, when supply is high and demand is less, prices crash. So the small farmers who are poor with very little money, they somehow take a loan or do something to invest. When it comes to selling things, they find that they don't get a good price. All right, they make losses. That is why even now the farmers' agitation is going on for MSP. That minimum support price. What will happen? The government, it means that there is a certain price at which government is ready to buy whatever you produce, any amount you produce. All right. If that happens, then market price will not go below that price, because if it goes below, you'll sell to the government. FCI, Food Corporation of India, will buy it. So market price will remain high. There would be therefore some profit at least. All right. So this is the problem of farmers in India, which is continuing even today, which has become worse now. That I'll tell you in the third phase of village studies. So when you are making losses, what do? You lease out your land to a big farmer for some income and you yourself become a laborer. Either a farm laborer or other kind of laborer, because agriculture is not profitable for you. There is a study by Sucha Singh Gill in Punjab. Over a decade, from 71 to 81, he says 60% of the marginal farmers gave up their land. You know what is a marginal farmer? Up to 2.5 acre of land. Small land holding. So they found agriculture totally unprofitable for them. That is the main issue for which the farmers are agitating. So these were the new problems that emerged, like depeasantization. Have you understood it now? Okay. Now third phase begins by late 90s. You know, in early 90s, there was a very significant policy change in India, which has been called economic reform, or it is called liberalization, privatization and globalization. Now, that produced very serious consequences for villages. That part of liberalization is, as our Prime Minister says, Atmanirbhar Bharat. You know what does it mean? That be self-dependent. Government is not going to give you any subsidy or any help. Atmanirbhar. Self-dependent. So withdrawal of subsidies from agriculture. Earlier, when farmers were in crisis, government will subsidize fertilizer. सस्ता दे देंगे. Or free electricity. Like that. Then they also declared MSP. So they will protect the farmers. Market prices will not crash. Now, after reforms, these subsidies have been withdrawn. And with globalization, the prices of inputs have risen. Input cost has drastically risen. And there is no progress as warehousing. Then farmers were also encouraged to diversify. One of the reasons that Indian agriculture did not diversify into areas where profits are high, like horticultural crops, fruit, vegetable, tomato, potato, orange, as in Punjab, kinnu. Like this, the diversification leads to higher profits. But all these crops demand cold storage because their shelf life is very small. All right. If there is no cold storage, farmers are forced to bring it to the market immediately. वही problem आ जाती है, prices crash. A year or two ago, there was major demonstration in various parts of India by farmers where they were throwing away tomatoes on the streets because they were getting a price in the market which was less than the cost they had to pay for growing tomatoes. So inputs बढ़ गए हैं, outputs price remain low, and then there are other problems, partly climate change and partly, you know, overutilization. See, free electricity had a problem also. अब आपको unlimited electricity है, you draw as much water as you want to. So you grow those crops which require a lot of water, particularly rice. Rice is a water guzzling crop, and rice had an advantage. FCI buys rice at MSP. So farmer was assured कि ये तो बिक ही जाएगा, I'll be able to sell it to the FCI. So they started cultivating too much of such crops which need water. The water table went down. So today, if a farmer wants to grow a crop which will give him good price, and for that he has to dig a borewell, he invested 2 lakhs, till 100 feet, no water, because water table has gone down. So 2 lakhs gone and no water. Sometime, because of climate change, heavy rain, floods, crop destroyed. Because crop insurance is yet to be effective. And therefore, what we have today is agrarian distress. Another factor has also developed. Now, all these things which I am telling you are based on the studies in the third phase. What happens is that with tractorization, premature mechanization, premature क्यों? When do you need a machine? When there are few people to work. All right. If the labor is in abundance, then you don't need a machine. You depend on labor. But in India, there is premature mechanization. We have surplus of labor, yet farmers are using tractors now. In Haryana and Punjab, you will not find a single bullock in the village for plowing the field. So, earlier there were large kin groups who helped out each other. Now you don't need others, you just have to hire a tractor for 2 days and entire field of yours is plowed. So families have broken down. We have nuclear families, husband, wife and children. Larger kin group bonds have broken in the villages. So when there is a crisis, like I took a loan and the water could not be located because of the water table going down, my money has gone waste, and I had put my wife's jewelry as a security with the money lender. Now what will happen? There is nobody to help me out giving extra loan. My wife will harass me that her jewelry gone. So what will I do? Commit suicide. So agrarian distress has led to lakhs of suicides in India. This is the third phase scenario. Now, at the same time, there is a scholar, sociologist, Harris. Harris, writing in 2010, you can note down the small paragraph that I'll read. He says, village studies once an important mode of research is now neglected. Alongside the neglect of agricultural economy in public policy. Alongside the neglect of agricultural economy in the public policy. You understand the meaning? He says sociologists have lost interest in village study, especially after 2000 onwards. He is writing in 2010, talking about the last decade at that time. So since then, nobody is taking interest in village studies. And he says, along with this, government is not taking interest in agriculture anymore. That is why those laws were made to facilitate corporatization of agriculture. So, in the public policy, that means government policy. Agriculture has got neglected, and the sociologists have also neglected village studies. Now, another few lines I'll read. This is by Walker. He says, the shift to neoliberal means economic reform. Shift to neoliberalism has led to neglect of the primary sector, particularly agriculture. And the growth is favoring urban India. See, most of the wealth is now generated in cities. You know that, no? Agriculture share in the GDP is less than 14%. So, with economic reform, most of the growth is now in the urban area. And this growth is predatory. Predation, you know, hunting, going and killing and grabbing. So, this growth is predatory. Like Vedanta invests in aluminium ore, grabs the entire land of the village. So, land acquisition and withdrawal of subsidies. So, this has precipitated agrarian crisis. So, now few studies that we have, as Harris says, interest in village studies itself has drastically declined among the sociologists. At one time it was praised so much, as I started my lecture by showing how important it was to study village. Now nobody wants to study village. But the few studies that are being carried out, their focus is on agricultural crisis. And changing pattern of land distribution. And the new phenomena that are emerging, like feminization of agriculture, large scale migration of the male workers towards non-farm occupations. They are moving away from agriculture because agriculture is so unrewarding. Then new pattern of labor relations, including neo-bondage. You understand neo-bondage? Neo means new. So earlier in India there was bonded labor. Alright. What is called in northern India begar. Forcing them to work for either no money or very little money. Now, in 70s, Indira Gandhi abolished bonded labor. But after economic reforms, that bonded labor has emerged again. This is called neo-bondage. The people in rural areas are so desperate for job, they'll work under any conditions because we are still highly labor surplus economy. Demand for labor is falling. So they are ready to surrender to any terms. So this has given rise to neo-bondage. Then changes in practices related to untouchability. You remember I told you ActionAid study of 550 villages in India regarding untouchability. That's an example. So, new village studies are also looking at the issue of untouchability. Then, Panchayat Raj. Many studies have been conducted about the consequences of Panchayat Raj institutions, both positive and negative consequences. Then emerging pattern of contract farming. And also farmer suicides. Then they are looking at changing gender relations, particularly when these changes give rise to honor killing. When women assert their individuality and right, there is a retaliation by adult males of the family and the kin group. So these are the new areas in which village studies are focusing. But on the whole, they say the village is in acute distress. That is why, there is so much of demand by farmers for reservation so that they can move from village to the city. Maratha reservation demand, Patels in Gujarat, Jats in Haryana, everybody demanding reservation. Gujars in Rajasthan. So Dipankar Gupta has described the village today. Now, it's a slightly long paragraph. You may listen to it and then we'll summarize it in a line or two, because you can't memorize and write the whole paragraph in the answer. But please listen to it carefully. Dipankar Gupta says, village is shrinking as a sociological reality. That means social importance of the village is drastically declining. In the beginning I said, at 50s it was thought village is an important sociological reality. To understand India, you need to understand village. Today that's not the case. So village is shrinking as a sociological reality. Nowhere else does one find the level of hopeless disenchantment as one find in rural areas of India. In urban slum, there is filth, there is crime, but there is hope. You know that song, Apna time bhi aayega. So there are slum dwellers who are singing this song. So in slum of city, though they live in poverty at the moment, there is lot of crime and filth, but there is hope. In the village, there is no hope. They have reached a dead end. So he says, rarely would a villager today want to be a farmer if he had a choice elsewhere. In fact, most rural institutions have been mauled. Mauled means attacked and partly damaged. Have been mauled from within. Joint family has disappeared in the village. Caste hierarchy is also on the decline. I told you, that from hierarchy we are moving to difference. It is the same idea. And the romanticized harmony of village life is exposed now. Gandhi and so many of those sociologists of 50s and 60s, they romanticize village means people living in love and harmony and peace and cooperating. Everything good was there in the village. Dipankar Gupta says that's nonsense. It's a sham. It was always a sham. Now it has come out in the open. There is so much of conflict in the village. He says it is Ambedkar's analysis of Indian village that appears to be true. When Gandhi glorified villages, Ambedkar attacked Gandhi. That he said village was a cesspool of degradation, corruption and worse. So people are continuing to live in the village because they have no choice. So this is the scenario today according to Dipankar Gupta. So it has lost its importance also in sociological research, and it has become a dead end for people who are stuck up in the village. That's why they are desperate to move out, demanding reservation. कि education होगी, government job या private sector job होगा, we'll move to the city. We'll have a better life. So that is the scenario. This is about idea of village and village studies. Now, if there is any question, please tell me. Anything you've not understood, anything you want a clarification? Ah. This is what Charles Metcalfe said, that village is able to produce almost everything that it needs within itself. So they have no relations with people outside the village. But that was not true. Yeah. That means instead of explaining change, they are telling us what is the nature of family in the village, what are the castes, how the castes are related, hierarchy, division of labor, Jajmani relations, all these things, patterns of relation they are studying within the village. This is what is called structure. Yes. It is actually, see, Gandhi, what he said was not incorrect. He did not say that villages as they exist are in a fine condition. But what he said was that we should not go in for massive industrialization. All right. Gandhi has to be understood in terms of totality. One, he wanted harmony between man and nature. Today we are realizing that when we have climate change problem, they say if the polar ice and those mountain ice that melts, Bombay and Chennai would disappear from the map. So climate change is a major problem. Pollution is a major problem. So Gandhi wanted a way of life which was based on harmony with nature. Then Gandhi wanted a way of life in which people voluntarily, not under compulsion, but voluntarily reduce their desires and wants. Gandhi's famous phrase that as a man or as a person reduces his or her desires, more godly they become. The problem of conflict comes when we have unlimited desires. So we should curtail our desires, lead a simple life. We should go in for appropriate technology in industrialization rather than blindly following the West, aping the West. Gandhi has not been taken seriously by anybody. And today, because of the the modernization path advocated by Nehru, it is the product of that we have all these crises. Now, what Gandhi said was perhaps too good to be practicable. That's what people thought. We will make it practicable when we are helpless. If there is a major crisis, see, capitalism has contributed to nuclear weaponry. Capitalism is creating so much of conflict in the world. All right. Why is America supporting Israel? Because America wants to control oil in this region. All right. So the warfare and the social life is also developing many problems. So Gandhi thought of an idealized vision which is difficult to follow and which nobody has taken seriously and nobody has followed. That is why I would say it is wrong to call Gandhi the father of nation. What should we do? We should call him grandfather of the nation. You know why? Grandfather is respected by all but never obeyed. Outdated. All right. So Gandhi is outdated. That's what people think, though he was right. So he is being treated as a grandfather. Everybody touches peripenna, touches the feet, but nobody obeys him. That is the scenario. No questions? Fine. Then we'll wind up today because the next topic will take a long time. Now, tomorrow we are having a class on research methodology. I think all of you can come. Some people absented the class on research methodology earlier. Huh? Actually, what they meant was that first paper class, but that is neutral. It doesn't require any background or anything. I'm going to discuss sampling, validity, reliability, basic things. So all of you can come. All right. Thank you. Yes, please. Huh? I didn't understand. Come closer and tell me. Huh? हाँ हाँ.
By village, he meant the people who are engaged in agriculture and its service.
Yes, in village there is only agriculture or allied activities, because we have failed in rural industrialization. We have not. There was a solution, but we never followed it seriously. We could have gone for agro-based industries, like for example, you grow kinnu and you have processing unit which makes various products with a longer shelf life, which are then sold in the cities and exported. So in that case, farmers will get high income because there will be demand for their produce. That kind of thing has not happened. So in village, there are very few occupations beside agriculture. And agriculture is unrewarding, and the demand for labor is also declining. Why? 90% of land holdings are either small or marginal. ये छोटी सी लैंड होल्डिंग है, you don't need labor for that. At the harvest time, at the most, you will hire somebody for a week, and that's all. So, गांव में नौकरियां ही नहीं है, there are no jobs. That is why there is so much of demand for मनरेगा. All right.